In the context of my proposal of the new Quaternary and Overdiagnosis Prevention Curricular Unit, I will share with you a lecture that will go from the overdiagnosis and quaternary prevention concepts to shared decision-making, and this all under the perspectives of some Portuguese studies. These would be the objectives of this lecture. I'm not going to read them all, but for example, at the end of this lesson and with complementary study, students would be expected to be able to describe the major characteristics and scope of quaternary prevention, overdiagnosis prevention, and shared decision-making. They would also be able to recognize some of the factors associated with this problematic in the Portuguese primary healthcare, and they will be able to design a decision-aids adaptation protocol and to engage with a multidisciplinary team to develop a randomized controlled trial to assess the impact of a decision aid. Let's start with the clinical vignette. Maria, she is 44 years old. She's a married mother of 2 girls. By the way, she loves to be a mother and to watch health-related TV series. She's a cashier in a supermarket. She had gestational diabetes in the second pregnancy 12 years ago. Her maternal grandmother had colon cancer. She also has a maternal aunt with colon cancer. And Maria's mother had 3 polyps removed. Finally, she is an active smoker. She moved to a new family health unit recently, so she has a new family doctor and she comes to her first appointment with him. Doctor, I am feeling quite anxious these days. I wonder if I have cancer. I would like really to know if I have cancer. I want to do those blood tests that allow us to know if one has cancer. In a clinical situation like this one, we may say that there is a reasonable probability that Maria would get, at the end of this medical appointment, a prescription for a routine blood test, colonoscopy, or a fecal occult blood test, eventually a prescription for a pap smear, eventually a mammography. In some cases, she will even get a breast ultrasound prescribed at the same time as the mammography. And in some cases, she would even receive that blood test she asked for, the serum tumor markers. The question is, are all these prescriptions more likely to benefit Maria or more likely to harm her? Or maybe some of these prescriptions would help Maria while others may indeed harm her. And let me raise some more questions. Maria is willing to do all these tests. Is she aware that making some of these tests may harm her? There is also the possibility that if she finds a more pious doctor, she will receive a low-dose lung CT, a whole-body CT scan, or even a whole-body MRI scan. This one would be the supreme test, wouldn't it? Well, sorry, Maria. Truth be told, there are already better tests to check it and to check if you have cancer. For example, there is the cancer-seq test. The cancer-seq test pulls circulating DNA from a blood sample and looks for mutations in 16 genes known to drive the growth of various cancers. It can, quote, identify 8 common cancers: ovary, liver, esophagus, pancreas, stomach, colorectal, lung, and breast cancer, end of quote. Or you may have a DNA test that you can get by the internet and will give you more than 55 health reports that meet the FDA requirements. Of course, I am being ironic. Remember that Maria had no symptoms except feeling anxious. And for most of those screenings, there may be a few who get some benefit. However, there will be a much higher number of patients that will suffer some form of harm. Here are some of the most common forms of damage. The more we look inside the human body, the more likely we are to find some abnormalities that would never bother or cause disease. It is the case of some thyroid nodules, gallbladder polyps, renal cysts, or hepatic hemangiomas. Once found, a cascade of tests is often initiated. In some cases, this cascade lasts for years. It may even last a lifetime. In some cases, this cascade may even end with more invasive interventions that would be unnecessary and can cause physical damage. A false positive, in addition to leading to additional and usually more invasive medical examination with physical discomfort for patients and not exempt from risks such as biopsy, for example, also cause psychological damage, both in short, either in the long run. And then we also have the risk of being overdiagnosed and overtreated. As these authors mention in this article, broadly, overdiagnosis means making patients unnecessarily by identifying problems that were never going to cause harm, or by medicalizing ordinary life experience through expanded definitions of diseases. Overdiagnosis has two major causes: overdetection and overdefinition of disease. Overdetection refers to the identification of abnormalities that were never going to cause harm, abnormalities that do not progress, that progress too slowly to cause symptoms or harm during a person's remaining lifetime, or that resolve spontaneously. Overdefinition occurs by two mechanisms: lowering the threshold for a risk factor without evidence that doing so helps people feel better or live longer, and by expanding disease definitions to include patients with ambiguous or very mild symptoms. This picture from Gilbert Welch's book helps us understand the problem of overdiagnosis in cancer screenings and why we have this problem. In most cancers, we have different cancer types, and we have a great heterogeneity of cancer progression. For example, we think about breast cancer. Some breast cancers grow really fast. In a very short time, cancer causes symptoms, and in a very short time, this kind of cancer causes death. And unfortunately, these cancers are often missed by screening. Then we have a slow-growing cancers that lead to symptoms and death, but only after many years. These are the cancers for which screening may indeed have a beneficial impact. But then we also have some cancers that grow so slow or are even non-progressive that they will never cause the patient's harm or death. These patients will die of something else before the cancer gives symptoms. They will die without knowing they have cancer. But if we do, or if we would have detected them, we, doctors, in the current state of the art, we cannot know that that cancer will never cause symptoms or death of our patient, which is why they will be unnecessarily treated. First, the patient will suffer when he receives the diagnostic information, you have cancer. And we all know this is a major impact on our patients' lives, and then they will suffer the treatment consequences. This involves surgical intervention, sometimes chemotherapy, radio, or other oncological therapies, all of them with great damage to our patients' quality of life. When we implement a screening, we are far more likely to catch slow-growing cancers than the really important fast-growing cancers, because the fast-growing cancers are detectable for only a short period of time before symptoms appear. And this is why in some cancer screenings, we are more likely to cause harm than benefit. Let me give you some quantitative idea of the dimension of overdiagnosis in some common cancer screenings. If we invite 1,055 men to do prostate cancer screening with PSA, after 11 years, one of them will be saved by the screening, but at the same time, 37 men will be overdiagnosed. These are data from the European randomized study of screening for prostate cancer. And there is a slight improvement from the same study when we look at the 13 years follow-up or even 16 years follow-up, but still a substantial number of overdiagnosed men. While it is almost impossible to know for sure if overdiagnosis has occurred in a concrete person, it is much easier to verify if it is happening in a population. For example, by comparing the rates of cancer diagnosis and cancer death over time. We see this huge spike in the incidence during the 80s due to a more significant number of surgical interventions to treat benign prostate hypertrophy. As more men had the operation, more prostate samples were sent to pathologists. And once again, if we look more, we find more. Then there is a decrease in the surgical interventions in the 90s because new medications to treat benign prostatic hypertrophy became available, and the incidence also decreases. But at the same time, the screening with PSA became popular, and the incidence remains high until 2008. From then on, we may see a reduction. I'd like to believe that this last reduction is related to the awareness of the PSA problems and these overdiagnosis problems. The fact is that we have a relevant coincidence in time with some points. In 2008, the United States Preventive Service Task Force published a review of the recommendation of related to prostate cancer screening, stating that there was insufficient evidence to recommend for or against this screening. And in 2009, the results of the European trial and the PLCO trial with conflicting evidence were published. What happened to mortality? During this time, it has been steady, or we could see a slight reduction, a very slight reduction. So we may say that all these new diagnoses are largely overdiagnoses. Truth be told, this figure that I just showed you is an updated version of this one, also from Gilbert Welch's book. If we screen 2,000 women for breast cancer, one will avoid death, 10 will be overdiagnosed, and 200 women will get a false positive result. And we have evidence that shows us that these women with false positives will also suffer psychological harm that sometimes lasts for years. And we have a similar reality as we did in prostate cancer. When we look at the evolution of breast cancer incidence and mortality, we see a significant increase in breast cancer incidence when breast cancer screening became widespread in the United States. We also have evidence of overdiagnosis in other clinical situations. For example, thyroid cancer, osteoporosis, asthma. Whenever we look more, we find more. And the problem is that very often we are doing more harm than good. That is why preventing overdiagnosis is, in fact, a part of quaternary prevention. As we mentioned in this other paper that we published in the British Journal of General Practice, it's not only about demedicalization, or it's more than that. It's about protecting patients from medical interventions that are more likely to cause harm than good, based, of course, on high-quality scientific evidence. Some factors usually are considered as driving forces that contribute to this status quo. Disease mongering, lowering thresholds of disease, the early diagnosis myth, the prevention myth, and there are even some unexplainable or mysterious facts or factors. But let us focus on these two, the early diagnosis myth and the prevention myth. These two myths have a strong contribution to the way people consume health service nowadays. The idea of the routine health check and the idea that the more medical surveillance, the better. We can say that there is a fascination in the population for medical screenings. Sometimes it seems that medical consultation is moved from a paternalistic model to that which we could call a consumeristic model. As I mentioned in this article published in the BMJ blog and also in the Portuguese Acta Médica, this is a kind of medical consultation where patients get what they want and which is quite different from the ideal shared decision-making model. We may even consider that we are facing a new health risk factor, the excessive and inappropriate use of medical tests. Let me show you some evidence of this considering the Portuguese population perspectives. We published this study in the PLOS1 journal. The aim was to assess which healthcare services were deemed necessary and what frequency by adults from the general Portuguese population. It was a population-based nationwide cross-sectional study. We made 1,000 computer-assisted telephone interviews. We had a list of preventive services, tests, screenings, and we made the following questions to the participants. A, do you consider that in your personal case you should undergo these tests? B, if so, how often? And C, do you usually undergo these tests? Here you may see the main results. I highlight that 99% of our respondents answered that yes, they believe they should undergo a routine blood and urine test. How often? Every 12 months. I believe this says a lot about this myth and this fascination related with checkups. Around the same percentage of women believe they should undergo pap smear and gynecological ultrasound, more than 80%. And the same to the breast ultrasound and mammography, 77%. We should keep in mind that gynecological and breast ultrasounds are not recommended to be used the screening tests. 70% believe they should undergo a lung X-ray, more than those that think they should undergo, for example, a fecal occult blood test. And the percentages of those who said that they really used to undergo these tests was also surprising high. Our findings indicate a tendency towards the overuse of resources. The majority of Portuguese adults believe that they should utilize a great number of healthcare services on a nearly annual basis. Most actually follow this schedule. We also assessed the patient's estimations of the importance of preventive health services. We published the results in the BMJ Open Journal, and our results revealed that Portuguese patients overestimate the importance of preventive medical activities, tend to give more importance to diagnostic and laboratory tests than to lifestyle measures. Do not discriminate tests that are important and evidence-based, and seem not to be aware of the individualization of risk. These results are not unique. They are in line with the study we have done in EuroPrev, the EuroPreview patient study, and that we published in the Family Practice Journal. There, we may see that patients from different European countries overestimate being screened for cardiovascular risk factors and for cancer. Now let me present you Olivia. Olivia is 39 years old. Olivia is very cheerful and curious, and she really loves ice cream. She comes to an appointment, but her family doctor is not at the practice. Because of this, she is attended by another doctor. And she says, I am glad it's not my doctor. Please don't take me wrong. I like my doctor very much, but sometimes I don't understand the tests he wants me to do and what they mean. For example, what is the meaning of this test called electrophoresis? Some minutes ago, I told you that sometimes some unexplainable factors also contribute to unnecessary medical interventions. What I will show you could be a story, but in fact it's reality. Here we have an example of when the health system induces unnecessary medicine, a Portuguese example. This was the lab test prescription model of the electronic health record software in the Portuguese National Health Service, health centers. To prescribe a test, the family doctor could prescribe one by one, or he could prescribe an entire set of tests. For example, if he shows the basic menu, is sort of a shortcut menu, he would prescribe the entire set of tests. We hypothesized that this kind of prescription software was inducing the prescription of unnecessary tests. For example, sedimentation rate, serum protein electrophoresis, the test, the Olivia's test, and lung X-ray. And we did a randomized controlled trial that was published in the BMC Medical Informatics and Decision Making Journal. The aim was to compare the effects of modifying the electronic health record tests ordering model by changing the basic menu and adding a clinical decision support system. We removed some low-value tests from the basic shortcut menu, like uric acid, serum protein electrophoresis, sedimentation rate, electrocardiogram, and lung X-ray. And please be aware that although these tests were removed from the basic shortcut menu, physicians were still able to request them by typing their names one by one in the search box. And we also added some tests, and we added an evidence-based decision support. Here is the modified version of the software. Here you may see the different composition of the basic menu, and also these traffic lights with the decision support tool. We added information of the United States Preventive Service Task Force for each test. So we did the randomization. In short, we evaluated the number of tests ordered per visit before and after the intervention, after the software modification, across 14 primary healthcare clinics. 7 of them were in the intervention group and 7 were in the control group. In a total, we had 117 prescribing physicians, family doctors, and more than 20,000 patients. And in these pictures, you may see what happened to some of those tests that were removed from the basic shortcut menu. Month 7 was when we implemented the modification of the software. And for example, in the case of the serum protein electrophoresis, we may see that the intervention group was prescribing more often this test before the intervention. And still, after the software modification, there is a 4-fold drop of this test prescription. And we also have a considerable drop in the prescription of uric acid, and also for sedimentation rate. So in total, clinics in the intervention group decreased the use of removed low-value tests from 31 tests to 13 tests performed per 100 visits. With the evidence display function of the United States Preventive Service Task Force, non-recommended tests decreased modestly from 11 to 9.8 tests performed per 100 visits. As you for sure are aware, there are some publications that used to publish in the beginning of each year a sort of compilations of the more relevant studies that were done in the year before. JAMA Internal Medicine is this habit and used to publish the yearly update on medical overuse. This was the 2018 update, and from the 70 most highly rated articles, the 10 most relevant studies were selected by consensus among all of the authors and are highlighted in this update. I was very happy and surprised when I saw this randomized control trial that we have done and that I just present to you included in this special issue and in this annual update. And they wrote, many electronic health record-based ordering innovations have been focused on improving the ease of ordering without regard to the appropriateness, which was the case in Portugal. And then they had all a section of this annual update focusing our randomized control trial. And according to the authors of this JAMA Internal Medicine annual update, these were the conclusions of our randomized control trial, and I agree with them. Modifying the electronic health record to make low-value tests less easy to order, coupled with recommendations about the value of tests, decreased test ordering by physicians. This study is an important addition to the burgeoning evidence supporting interventions to reduce unnecessary testing, many of which leverage the electronic health record. This form of diagnostic stewardship that guides testing without restricting tests as promised as a first step toward sustainably reducing over-testing. Yesterday, I believe Professor Vaz Carneiro asked me which was the study that I felt was more special to me. This randomized controlled trial was one of those that was incredibly gratifying. It is especially gratifying when our research impacts real life. To see changes implemented, and the software was indeed changed, International Health Service, to see our conclusions being useful for others, to see this study, this randomized control trial included in this particular article, this annual compilation of relevant studies on medical overuse, was indeed very gratifying. And now let me talk about James. James is an American citizen that is living in Portugal since 2018. He loves to travel and he loves to dress well. And as you may see in the picture, he also loves long beards. The last time he visited his family in the States, he didn't feel well one night. The heart was beating too fast. He went to a clinic and the doctor prescribed him an anticoagulant. He comes to an appointment now here in Portugal because he needs to renew the prescription. They say, I have to do this treatment for all my life to avoid strokes. Do I? Oops. James had atrial fibrillation, but he was less than 65 years old, had no heart failure, no hypertension, no diabetes, and no major adverse cardiovascular events. So he had no medical indication to be anticoagulated. This is an interesting case of overtreatment without overdiagnosis. This is one example of the need for quaternary prevention without the need for overdiagnosis prevention. As I mentioned yesterday, quaternary prevention should not be faced as a panacea, nor should it be faced as a risk-free medical activity. With the intention of minimizing harms, there is the risk of refusal of some medical interventions that would indeed benefit some patients. This means we have to be judicious with the application of the best available evidence. Usually, overdiagnosis leads to overtreatment, but the reality is complex, especially in family medicine. The reality is not always only white or black. Sometimes we may have the coexistence of overtreatment and undertreatment. Let me share with you a piece of reality. This study was accepted by the BMJ Open Journal just 2 or 3 weeks ago. That is why it was not possible to include it in the documents I delivered when I made the submission for this Provas de Agregação. And it's a real-world data study. We analyzed data from the Regional Health Administration of Northern Portugal. We identified 63,526 patients with code K78 of the International Classification of Primary Healthcare. This code means these patients had the diagnosis of atrial fibrillation. After analyzing diverse kind of variables available in the dataset, including comorbidities of these patients, the medications prescribed of these patients during those 3 years, Among other things, it was possible to see the coexistence of undertreatment and overtreatment. So, albeit having an indication, a considerable proportion of patients, 27%, were not anticoagulated. And among atrial fibrillation patients without an indication to receive the anticoagulation therapy, a considerable proportion, 40%, were indeed received anticoagulants. So these were overtreated. Let me present you Manuel and Clara. They used to come together to the appointment with their family doctor, and they loved to do hiking in the mountains surrounding the Douro River. One day, Manuel shared the following. Doctor, does my wife really have to do a mammography? Let me explain. She doesn't want to do it, but she is being pressed to do it by her mother and by her cousins to do it. And we also read in the newspaper that the study in Canada showed no benefit from mammography. On the contrary, the article mentioned there were some side effects. Some more facts. Clara didn't have the age for whom is recommended to undergo the screening. There was no family history of breast cancer nor ovarian cancer. She wanted some science-based facts about breast cancer screening. These patients want information. They want to be health literate. Adequate patient-oriented strategies regarding the use of medical tests and preventive interventions with appropriate information and discussion of risk and harms are urgently needed and crucial for achieving a more rational use of healthcare service and for preventing the consequences of overtesting. And in this context, I believe shared decision-making may have a decisive role. Shared decision-making is supported by evidence from 86 randomized trials showing knowledge gained by patients, more confidence in decisions, more active patient involvement, and in many situations, informed patients elect for more conservative treatment options. Shared decision-making has been defined as an approach where clinicians and patients share the best available evidence when faced with the task of making decisions and where patients are supported to consider options to achieve informed preferences. The model has three steps. The choice talk to introduce the choice. B, the option talk. Here it may be useful to integrate a patient decision support tool. And C, the decision talk by helping patients explore preferences and make decisions. This model rests on supporting a process of deliberation and on understanding that decisions should be influenced by exploring and respecting what matters most to patients as individuals, and that this exploration in turn depends on them developing informed preferences. We believe in shared decision-making, but what does the Portuguese population think about shared decision-making? Do Portuguese want to have a more active role in the decisions about their health, or they just want the doctors to decide? Does the willingness for shared decision-making change with the healthcare setting? For example, primary healthcare setting versus emergency room setting? Or is it different if you are dealing with a minor health problem or for example, screening, or from a situation where we are dealing with a life-threatening condition? All of these questions are relevant and deserve to be researched. And so our team started digging. And we found a tool that we thought could give us some answers. We discovered the problem-solving decision-making scale, a tool that measures preferred roles in health-related decision-making. A Canadian team of researchers developed this tool. We made contact with them, asked for authorization to translate and adapt it to Portuguese, and then we made a validation. We published the results of this process in the BMJ Open journal. And then we applied the problem-solving decision-making scale in a population-based nationwide study to assess patients' preferred roles in healthcare-related decision-making in a representative sample of the Portuguese population. We submitted the results of the study on December 29th, and the manuscript is now under peer review. The primary outcome was patients' preferred role for each vignette of the problem-solving decision-making scale. Social demographic factors associated with the preferred roles were the secondary outcomes. So that you can better understand the results, you can see a compact version of the problem-solving decision-making scale in this table. The scale is a questionnaire, and there are 3 vignettes: a morbidity vignette, a mortality vignette, and the quality of life vignette. For example, the quality of vignette states, suppose you and your partner have been trying for pregnancy, but have been unsuccessful for more than a year. And for each vignette, participants have to answer 6 questions. For example, the diagnosis question: who should diagnose what the likely causes of your symptoms are? The first 4 questions are the problem-solving component. The last 2 questions, utility and what is then, are the decision-making component. And the answers go from doctor alone, mostly to doctor and you equally, that is more the shared the decision-making, mostly you, and to you alone, to the patient alone. So we had 599 participants. They were phase interviewed, and most patients preferred a passive role for problem solving and also for the decision-making component of the scale. And particularly so in the mortality vignette, 66.1% of the patients preferred a passive role in this vignette. So here we may see for the quality of life vignette, we had 44% of the patients preferring a shared role. The proportion of patients that preferred a shared role was higher in the quality vignette. You may see this. In neither of the 3 vignettes, we have patients preferring an autonomous role. Most in the 3 vignettes, the percentage or the proportion of patients that wanted the doctor to decide and wanted a more passive role was always higher than in the other vignettes. In this representative sample of Portuguese mainland population, most patients preferred a practitioner controlling role for both the problem-solving and decision-making components. In a less serious situation, there is more willingness to participate in decision-making, but still low. And we have found that shared decision-making is more acceptable to younger and better educated patients in the problem-solving component, and to people who are younger, divorced, healthy, higher educated, employed, and those who mostly work on their own in the decision-making component. After these results, I'm thinking about doing a qualitative study to explore the possible reasons for these results. And once more, health literacy may have an essential role in this topic tool. There are, of course, some barriers to face regarding shared decision-making on both sides, on the patient side and on the doctor sides. According to Glenn Elwin, low health literacy or low numeracy will be barriers to shared decision-making, and some patients come from cultural backgrounds that lack a tradition of individuals making autonomous decisions. And then some healthcare professionals also express doubts, saying that patients don't want to be involved in decisions, lack the capacity or ability, might make bad decisions, or worry that shared decision-making is just not practical given constraints such as time pressure. However, change is possible. And as we mentioned yesterday, there are already some tools to support shared decision-making. Here are some examples: option grids, visual charts, choosing wisely, decision aids. There is indeed evidence that these tools are useful. For example, here we have an option grid from the Glenn Elwin group. Here we have an example of a visual chart. This one is from Gigerenza's group. Gigerenza's group work with visual charts is indeed admirable. And choosing wisely also developed excellent tools. For example, here we have a patient leaflet from Choosing Wisely Canada. And here we have a patient decision tool. About patient decision tools, it is important to highlight the work of the International Patient Decision Aid Standards collaboration. In our team, we thought it would be relevant to start developing some patient decision aids in Portuguese. And we had, there was a question, a relevant question: what would be the best format? And once again, we started digging in, and we made this systematic review and meta-analysis that we published in the Journal of Medical Internet Research to assess which would be the best format. A web-based format for the patient decision aid about prostate cancer screening, comparing, for example, with video format with the classical printed format. Here are the results, and our conclusions were that web format is better than usual care, than no patient decision aid, and web format is similar to printed format. After this systematic review, we made some research looking for patient decision aids for prostate cancer screening. And we found one that seemed interesting, developed by the team of Professor Catherine Taylor from the Georgetown University, Washington. We got in touch and they authorized us to translate and culturally adapt it. First, we published the protocol. Then we published a qualitative study with the results of this process. In this process of translation and cultural adaptation, we followed the European Center for Disease Prevention Control at the ECDC, a 5-steps approach to adapting health communication materials. This approach was developed, tested, and evaluated through a series of ECDC projects with public health practitioners, agencies, and associations in 7 European Union countries. It involves active engagement of patients, clinicians, and researchers to ensure quality, comprehension, contextual and cultural appropriateness, and applicability of any of the adapted decision aids. And so this here we have a need of a multidisciplinary team. We need patients, we need and we involved translators from the Faculty of Letters of the University of Porto. We involved actors. We had the need for a designer, a web designer, and also family doctors. And here you may see a little bit of the result of this work. This is the print format of our patient decision aid related with prostate cancer screening that has been developed. We also have our own visual charts and also a sort of option grid. And we developed the two formats, the print one and the web one. Here is the web format of this patient decision aid. In the web format, our patients will be able to watch some videos. And here was the role of the actors. We needed the actors to do these videos. So we had to follow these steps, finding one, the translation, the adaptation. And now that we have these tools, these two patient decision aids, we need to test them. And so we already submitted and already published the protocol to do this randomized control trial to assess and to test these patient decision aids. So this asks for working in a multidisciplinary team, and it will be very important that the students of our master course understand this. And of course, this is a broad field of research, and there are other possible strategies and research. Here is another path, another important line of research. For example, we have done already this systematic review related with reducing potentially inappropriate prescriptions for older patients. And now we are already developing, and we have already the authorization to also translate and adapt some of the classical tools used in this field. So this is also a very important and line of research. And there are other possible strategies and research. Indeed, there is the need of a call for action for our master students, for our PhD students. We may develop, as we said yesterday, option grids, patient decision aids, and then we have to test them. Also, we need more real-world research on overdiagnosis with Portuguese epidemiological data, or even in an international network of research. It will be also, for example, to check the reality of overdiagnosis in different European countries. It will be, of course, very, very important, relevant, and interesting. As I said yesterday, I wouldn't be here, nor would I alone have been able to produce all this work. All this was possible with a lot of help, a lot of networking, and to all our team, I would like to leave a special thank you. I would like to mention, for example, Professor Andrea Teixeira, our statistician, always so available to help us. Thank you very much. Professor Sofia Batista, a family medicine colleague, and my former PhD student, a big, big thank you. Rosália Páscoa, Micaela Gregório, Luís Monteiro, André Borges Silva, Susana Pinto, Filipa Farleiro, Professor Luísa Sá, thank you for all you have done. To all my PhD and master students, thank you all. Your work is bearing fruit. I would also like to leave a special thank you to my two former department directors, Professor Alexandre Sousa Pinto and Professor Alberto Pinto Espanhol. I am here today because you recruited me. Thank you very much. And of course, a special thank you for my current department director, for your support, for everything, Professor João Fonseca. Thank you very much. And to all my current department colleagues, thank you all. And last but not least, my family. My parents, thank you. My wife, Assunção, she loves to read. My daughter, Maria, she loves to draw and paint. My son, Pedro, he loves to play soccer. Thank you all. Thank you very much for your love and for making me happy. And this is me. I am 50 years old and I love to ride my bicycle. Thank you very much for all your attention.